don't know. Like, none of these responses really. I don't know if I would necessarily care too much. Um, Sharing a bed, you were excited to sleep in the loft. You were looking forward to sleep over with your moms. You weren't too happy either, but didn't want to make a fuss. You thought it was unfair that Cove had to sleep on the floor. I'm fine. I don't care. I don't think I really care. As long as you had a place to rest your head of some description, it didn't bother you. All right, you lot. Does everyone have everything they need? We're heading out in 5 minutes. Now's the time to double check. You don't want to forget something important. At the word, Elizabeth yelped and dashed back into the house, her bedhead hair bouncing behind her as she went. Ma came over and gave you a smile, setting her hands on her hips. How about you, Vaughn? Do you have all your clothes packed? Toiletries, deodorant, floss? Anything else you can think of? You were confident you had it all. You weren't sure about that. Oh, you have to run back inside for something. You just gave her a flat look. Knowing me, I have to run back inside for something. Sprinting up the stairs to the bathroom, you grabbed your toothbrush from beside the sink before heading back down. You were glad you were reminded to grab it after having left it out to use this morning. It would have been embarrassing if you couldn't brush your teeth for the next few days. Yeah, I would hate that. I take care of my teeth. Like, I'm very anal about my teeth maintenance, so I'd be upset if I didn't have my toothbrush. I mean, I could always get a new one, but your mom was still there waiting with a knowing expression as you walked out again. Got everything now, Vaughn? Yeah. With a few minutes left to spare before leaving, you mentally went over what you had packed for the trip. Clothes, a pillow and blanket, usual day-to-day gear for most people. You also had more personal things, such as a portable gaming console. Heck yes. Pencils and paper, your favorite stuffed animal, a couple of things to read, a bag of makeup, a ball, your camera, an MP3 player with headphones. Definitely a portable gaming console. The drive to the Redwood National Park would take an entire day one way, so you wanted to make sure you had a way to entertain yourself while traveling there and back. Not so much pencils and paper, not my favorite stuffed animal. Maybe a couple of things to read. Not a bag of makeup, not a ball. My camera, an MP3 player with headphones, and that was everything. Yeah, my camera. It was just a little pocket camera you had gotten from your mom's, but you couldn't miss the opportunity to take some new snaps. And I didn't really listen to music much when I was that age. Not a huge music person. I liked music just fine, but I never really had like an MP3 player or CD player or had a specific favorite artist by any stretch of the imaginations. Like, music was, I appreciated it when I heard it, but I didn't go out of my way to own any. It's a little bit different now. A couple of things to read. You had packed one of your old favorites, a new one you'd never tried before. You knew you'd have plenty of time for them both on such a long drive. And that was everything. Hey, let me take that for you, Vaughn. I'll stow it in the RV. There's a few spots left it'll fit. You let Kyra take your bag and gave her a grateful smile. With nothing left to do, you watched the others getting ready for the trip. Kyra and Cliff seemed to have the most energy of anyone. They were finishing packing the suitcases away while your moms had gone to lock up the house. They high-fived whenever another one got crammed into the storage compartments of the vehicle. Even though your own parents were more low-key than Coves, you could tell that they were both excited for the trip. It had been a while since your family had been away anywhere together. Elizabeth skipped towards the RV, a bag slung over her shoulder, and you were surprised to see she seemed more optimistic about the whole ordeal now. Usually she wasn't one to exit the confines of a room unless it was for TV, or food, or to leave her family behind to be with friends. You would have thought 3 whole days packed in an RV with 6 others would be too much for her, but it was a nice surprise. You supposed any vacation was better than no vacation in her mind. Cove had been pretty quiet so far, and more than anything, seemed to be overwhelmed by the situation. You were excited for the trip too. You weren't very excited for the trip either. You were eager to get to the destination. You were curious about the RV. You didn't feel much either way about the plans. It's either of these two, because I think RVs are cool. I would also be eager to get to the destination, honestly. So I'm trying to think, like, between the two, I would be curious about the RV, but just to show how much I am not a huge, like, road trip person, I will say I'm eager to get to the destination, because I think that slightly is more true than curious about the RV. You'd been looking up the park online and couldn't wait to explore everything it had to offer. Soon the miscellaneous remaining tasks had all been wrapped up. Everyone piled into the RV. It was officially time for the trip to start. And it did. Cliff took the first shift driving. He cautiously navigated the massive car out of the narrow neighborhood streets. It was touch and go for the first part of the journey. Your moms and Kyra were all huddled at the front, trying to get a view of how much space they had on each side. There was a sense of relief when the first long leg of the trip was hit, and the RV would only need to go down one stretch of highway for miles. The mom group cleared out of the driver's area, leaving Cove's dad to it, taking more comfortable seats around the main cabin. You felt like you could finally relax now, too. Time slipped by as morning faded away. Before you realized it, the engine of the RV came to a stop, but it only halted for a few moments as Cliff climbed out from the driver's seat and Mom took over. Ma was sitting shotgun, giving Mom a quick tutorial on controls, as it was her first time driving anything this large. Cliff groaned as he headed towards the rest of you, stretching his arms above his head and loosening up his muscles. We're making good progress. Yeah, maybe you should take a nap in the back for a while. That was a long haul you just did, and I know you're on less sleep than usual. Cliff waved a hand, and that trademark grin of his slipping into place. Nah, I don't need sleep. I still got a few miles in the old tank. He flexed an arm, showing off his muscles, to drive the point about how resilient he was home, and Kyra rolled her eyes in amusement. Dad, everybody has to sleep. Everybody has to sleep. Cove shook his head at the tough guy act, though Cliff simply chuckled and ruffled his son's hair.
So?
Are you going to be driving again anytime soon, Mr. Holden? I want to know so I can prepare. Did anyone pack some rope? I might need it. There's no seatbelts up here. Elizabeth called down from where she was lounging in the loft above the driving compartment. She was laying on her back, her hair falling over the side, and swinging around as the RV started up again and took off down the road. A bag of potato chips was balanced on Elizabeth's stomach, and she tossed a couple in her mouth right as Cliff held a hand to his chest, pretending to be offended by the remark. Kyra laughed lightheartedly.
Don't worry about that.
Lucky for all of us, we have enough adults to cover the shifts today. He won't be driving again until tomorrow. You stayed quiet. You shook your head at the ribbing. Phew, that's a relief. Just enough time to write up my last will and testament. We shouldn't gang up on the poor guy. It's not his driving I'm worried about. I don't know, I'm pretty picky about people driving, so it's not his driving. We should get prepared. It's not time to write my last will. You shook your head at the ribbing. You stayed quiet. Whew, that's a relief. Not you too. You wiped imaginary sweat off your brow, and the rest of the group laughed while Cliff pouted. Mom then shouted back in her seat to join in the conversation, a playful smile tilting her lips. What I'm more worried about is this old monster getting us there and back again before falling apart. It looks as though it was built in the early 90s. It must be older than some of the occupants. That's just the aesthetic of the decor. It's not that old. I think. Did you ask what year the model was before you rented it? Kyra wrinkled her nose in thought.
Hey!
Yes, I did. I just can't remember what the answer was. Cliff chuckled at her, while the rest of you let out a collective sigh. The RV lurched a little as it picked up speed, and you held onto the ladder to the loft to keep your balance. You felt something graze the top of your head before a weight settled on your black hair. When you tilted your chin up carefully to look, you heard the rustling of the bag of chips and realized Elizabeth had rested the end of it on your head. She gestured to the opening, silently offering to share her snack. Oh, I'm definitely getting snacks. Yeah, I definitely want food. You took a handful. Reaching up, you scooped up some chips, and after that, the weight of the packet left your skull. You happily munched away as the conversation continued on, and you got closer and closer to your destination. The day flew by, with the group of you chatting, playing games, and passing the time together before finally arriving at the park and setting up for the night. Ma was closing the windows while everyone got ready for bed, saying goodnight to the others as she made her way back way to the back room. That is one thing that would have made sense to include as things to bring. Things that I would have brought would be board games or just, board games, card games. That's like a staple if we were to like go on a road trip in an RV, I think. Love board games and card games. You had all had dinner together while still driving, and some hours after had arrived at your destination and found a spot to park in for the rest of their stay. Giving a look across the front of their RV, you noticed almost everyone there was already dozing off where they were, with Cove having completely fallen asleep curled up in the passenger seat. He must have done so while Kyra was driving the last leg, and they had decided not to disturb him. Kyra herself was the only one up there who was still awake, flipping through a magazine next to a portable light from her spot on the couch. It seemed Mr. Holden needed to sleep despite his claims. You followed your moms into the back room and closed the door behind you before crawling into the bed between them. It was a queen-size bed, so there was enough space for the three of you together without too much squishing.
Good night.
Get a good rest, Vaughn. We've got a big day ahead of us tomorrow.
That's fantastic.
I'm looking forward to the bush walk in the morning. It's been a long time since I was out in nature like this. There will be plenty for us to see. You stayed awake for a little while longer while your moms whispered about the park and forests in general. With the sound of their voices in the background, eventually you nodded off to sleep. The next morning, you were up bright and early preparing for the day ahead. You had slept well. You had an okay sleep. You had slept terribly. On an RV, I would probably say I slept okay. I don't know. Would I have slept with all those people in one space in an RV? Honestly, yeah, I probably would have slept terribly under those conditions. Yeah, I would say you'd slept terribly. There hadn't been enough room for you to spread out or just readjust your position. The mattress was uncomfortable and it became hot with two other people next to you. Yeah. Temperature. If it's too hot, not gonna happen. Sleep is not my friend, unfortunately. Ma whined a bit about the firmness of the mattress, but Mom had only encouraged her to enjoy the trip while she could. While looking for a spot to get ready, you had some trouble finding a space of your own as the others were doing the same thing. Cove was perched on top of the counter, brushing his hair and tucking up his legs every time someone wanted to move past. The parents were checking, double-checking, and triple-checking that you had everything, to the point where you had stopped listening to them altogether. You knew you wouldn't be returning to the RV at all that day, but by the look of the backpacks that were packed up and ready to go, you doubted anything was missing from them. It didn't take much longer until you all exited the RV in a bustle and headed into the Redwood National Park. Wow. Cove had his head tilted upwards Cove had his head tilted up towards the canopy of trees, his eyes wide as he took in the massive trunks on either side of you. You knew that the redwood trees here were considered the tallest trees on Earth, but you weren't prepared for exactly how huge they would be in person.
Come on.
Smile, you two. You spun just in time for Kyra to snap a picture of you and Cove together before she pointed her camera at Cliff, trying to get a shot despite his weak protest that she should just enjoy the moment. Your parents know I'm all about enjoying the moment and saving the moment, because then I can enjoy the moment a little bit afterwards too, while still savoring the moment too. Your parents were walking behind the group a little, with Mom telling Ma some information she had read about the park in the brochure. Ma listened happily while looking around and taking in the sights, every now and then asking a question or making a joke about something Mom had said. You smiled at them, thinking your mom must have read a lot of pamphlets to know so much about the park. Maybe you should come and work here as a tour guide, if you know so much about the place. Elizabeth teased, earning a squeeze on the nose from your mom. She seemed to be enjoying herself, but you thought that might just be because she was amused by everyone else's reactions. You were in awe of the redwood trees, you were fascinated by the sensations surrounding you, you were in a good mood, you weren't as impressed as the others, you were embarrassed that the adults were being so touristy. Now, I like being touristy, personally. I'd be impressed. I'm in a good mood. I think I would be fascinated by the sensations surrounding me. I mean, it would be that or the redwood trees, because the redwood trees would be really cool, but I think I'd be more fascinated by the sensations. Bird calls echoed all around you, and once or twice something would rustle in the underbrush. You strained your eyes through the trees for any sign of wildlife and managed to catch a glimpse of a rabbit bounding through the foliage. Yeah, I would think the redwood trees would be cool and awesome, but I probably also would be very enraptured by the wildlife and animals and nature and the fresh air. The adults had decided on some casual nature walks rather than any serious hiking, and you strolled along at your own pace, taking in the scenery. Elizabeth sped up a little, smirking at Cove as she fell into place between the two of you, and immediately you could tell by her expression she was going to say something taunting. I can't believe our families are actually on vacation together. She threw her arms out, speaking with a genuine sense of bewilderment. I would have joked about something like this happening, but now I'm not sure I want to give them any more ideas. Cove smiled at her, even if it was a little awkwardly, and continued walking along. Just watch. Next year they'll be talking about their next new, amazing idea. She put on a fake voice deeper than her own. We should just sell both our houses and move in together. Think of how much we'd save on the mortgage. It was clear that Elizabeth was being sarcastic. Cove simply shook his head, not really bothered by her. You suppose he was used to it by this point. But seriously, they really do act like we're a single family, just because we live across the street from each other. Elizabeth gave you and Cove a look, her eyes glinting with mischief as she leered at you.
Yeah.
Maybe one day we will be related. Legally, anyway. Even Elizabeth ships us. She said it as though she was a gossipy old lady. But she almost immediately dropped the tone and nonchalantly said her real thoughts. At least, that's what Ma thinks. Cove still blushed, which made Elizabeth smile triumphantly, as though that was her whole purpose for teasing him. Then he mumbled quietly, refusing to make eye contact with either of you. I don't know why you think you're so funny when no one else does. You told her to cut it out already. Cove has a point. It wasn't a great comment. I'll marry you, Cove. You ignored Elizabeth. You're embarrassed. What would I do? Cove has a point. It wasn't a great comment. I'll marry you, Cove. You ignored Elizabeth. You were embarrassed. I kind of would just probably... My gut reaction would just be ignore. You ignored Elizabeth. You said nothing, choosing to let your sister prattle on to her heart's content. You knew from years of experience that the best way to annoy Elizabeth was by not giving her any attention at all. Are you even listening? Huh? Did you say something? She huffed at you for that one. The day continued on with plenty to see and experience. You passed a few different activities that you would have liked to try out if you had the time, such as kayaking and rock climbing, but Ma said that would have to wait for another trip. There was a little stream during the walk that you had sat beside. During the walk that you sat beside and set out a picnic for lunch, nibbling on a selection of fruit, sandwiches, and chips. Various birds flew by overhead, and you made a game out of guessing the species that were hanging out in the trees nearby. You even managed to get a couple of them right, including the kingfisher that grabbed half a Cliff's sandwich. You were glad you got to do this at the end. You were disappointed to only have one day in the park. You thought the long trip wasn't worth only one day here. You had more fun hanging out in the RV, definitely not. You hadn't had a good time with this trip. You were disappointed to only have one day in the park. There was so much here, and you felt like you'd need a whole week, maybe even more, to experience it all. You sighed quietly to yourself, wondering if you'd get the chance to come back. Your group made it back to camp just as the sun was setting in the sky, and the stars were appearing, one by one. Everyone had enjoyed different parts of it most. You traded stories of what you thought while you were eating dinner, then afterwards you pitched in to help clean up. You, along with Elizabeth and Cove, got to head back to the RV early and spend some time together while the parents stayed outside longer. It was nice to have the space to yourselves after the cramped journey there, and while Elizabeth had locked herself in the back room with her headphones, you and Cove were left in the main lounge area. You headed up to the loft to relax on your own. You hung out with Cove. Yeah, I would hang out with Cove. You might as well get comfortable. Who knows how long they'll be out for? You took a seat on the sofa while Cove sat down on the other end, tapping his fingers against his knees. Your cheeks warmed a little at that. Being close to him never failed to feel exciting. You'd seen Cove nearly every day for the past 5 years, but seeing him in a jacket was still somewhat unusual. In Southern California, he could get away with that. It was a simple difference from his normal style, yet you couldn't help noticing the way he looked right now. It looked great on him. In fact, Cove always looked nice. When Cove cleared his throat, your eyes snapped to his. He had an eyebrow raised and it clearly caught you staring at him.
What?
Is everything okay? You averted your gaze from it entirely. Yeah, don't worry about it. That looks nice on you. Yeah, everything is really good. You nodded while saying nothing. That looks nice on you. Cove immediately blushed at the unexpected compliment. What? He didn't say anything more than that one-word question. You decided to elaborate further. You know, I hardly ever see you wearing a jacket, especially in summer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I like wearing as few layers as possible. It's easier that way. I'd rather be cold than extra hot, and it's kind of a pain to carry extra clothes around. My parents made me bring this jacket. I'm the same way. I don't mind either way. I love wearing layers. I love layers and accessories too. Yeah, I mean, I'd rather be cold too. Yeah, I'd rather be cold than extra hot. Yeah, I'm the same way. They're bulky and heavy, and they usually make me feel too warm. Cove smiled lightly at you and nodded. I've noticed. You perked up hearing that. He noticed you too? You changed the subject. You asked him what he'd like to see others wear. Hey, what kind of things do you think are nice to see on another person? Cove's eyes widened at the question. His defensive reply seemed to slip out before he'd had the chance to have a proper think about it. Nothing. Oh, really? You'd rather people wore nothing in front of you, eh, Cove? Nothing, eh? That was funny. You paid it no mind. I think that was funny. You laughed out loud and Cove gave you a dry look.
Come on.
Come on, that's not what I meant. You composed yourself and sat up straighter, all traces of laughter disappearing from your face. Answer with what you do mean then. Isn't there anything at all you think looks good when you see it on someone? Cove mumbled under his breath and you couldn't quite catch the words. He was having a difficult time with the subject. It was a topic that made him uncomfortable, so you let it go. You had a little fun and that was enough. You changed the subject. You're not very good at these conversations, are you? I wouldn't say that. I swear I won't make fun of you. I'll say, I just thought it would be fun to talk about. You hadn't intended for this to sour the mood. Cove sighed and looked down at his lap where he was fidgeting with his hands, still reluctant to give an answer.
I don't know.
Okay. You made an unimpressed sound over how this was going. Are you sure? Fine, I guess I kind of like ankle bracelets. Ankle bracelets? Yeah, everyone can wear a pretty bracelet. Wrist ones are cool too, but they're pretty normal. There's something fun or flirty about ankle bracelets. I can see that. I can totally see that.
I mean...
It's more special or something. I don't know how to explain it. Cove brushed his knuckles against his cheeks awkwardly, seemingly unsure where to go from here. Thanks for answering. I like them too. Huh, out of everything in the world you picked that? So you think they're sexy? I'll say, yeah, I like them too. I like them too. Cove smiled at you, happy to hear he wasn't the only one who felt that way. Because I never really thought about ankle bracelets. Like, I've seen them on people, but now that I think about it, like, ankle bracelets on guys, I think is attractive. And it's one of those things that I would have not thought about it until it was mentioned. I'm like, yeah, I can see that. Ankle bracelets are attractive on guys. I feel like ankle bracelets, a single ankle bracelet on a guy kind of reminds me of, like, you know, surfer dudes, surfer guys, kind of, like on the beach. So I would probably find an ankle bracelet more sexy on guys over a wrist bracelet or even a necklace on guys, probably. Yeah, there's something about that. Good pick, Cove. Never would have thought that. When he said nothing else, you took a moment to gather your own thoughts. You had to get an anklet on ASAP. Maybe you'd wear more anklets more now. Maybe you wouldn't wear your anklets so often. You thought about buying an anklet of your own. You were happy to hear more about Cove, but it didn't really change anything. You thought about buying an anklet of your own. You'd seen some good ones in the shops in town. You tried to remember to check it out more closely the next time you were there. Cove looked away again, feeling awkward about this. You gave him an understanding look, and usually he would start to smile like normal again, but not this time. His expression only stiffened more. Oh, I made the poor boy uncomfortable. Maybe I pushed him too hard. You were surprised to see him like this, as he always bounced back pretty quickly after being flustered. Cove? Still, he wouldn't look back at you, and now even his breathing was growing tense. It began to click. He was trying to build himself up enough to say something hard for him. You waited for it silently. Until finally, he peeked your way through the corner of his eyes. You were fully attentive by this point for whatever he was going to mention next.
That's,
People having brown eyes, that's also something I like. Huh? For a moment you were stunned, and at a complete loss for words. That was definitely not where you imagined this was going. Cove faced you head on, his expression full of desperate meaning. I tend to prefer lighter eyes. I love green eyes. Blue eyes, like really deep blue eyes, are killer for me. My husband has greenish hazel. I like hazel eyes too. You got the distinct impression he hadn't chosen that just because he liked the color brown. He chose it entirely because it was your eye color. I had a feeling. Was he trying to flirt with you? That was all you could think. Your legs felt like jelly and you wondered if you might fall right off the couch. What do you like for another person, Vaughn? Muscles. Pretty hair. Glasses. Blue eyes. Everything about you. I do appreciate muscles, but not a lot. Like, I like somebody who is fit, but not like a gym rat, if that makes sense. I like pretty hair. That's the thing. The type of hair that I like on guys, I wouldn't call it pretty hair, you know? Hair is very important to me on guys, but I don't know if pretty hair is the way that I would put my personal taste. Definitely when I was a lot younger, blue eyes was like the thing. Blue eyes. Cove blushed a deeper shade of red and his mouth fell open, acknowledging that you had used the same line back on him. Now you were both flirting with each other. It's kind of obvious that I liked him. I mean, we went on a soiree together. He placed his hands in his lap and looked down. It seemed he hadn't expected to get this far and didn't know where to go from there. With that, the topic abruptly dropped off. Cove officially had no more to say on it. The parents all arrived soon after, each of them climbing into the RV and finding someplace to sit down and rest their legs. Elizabeth, having heard the commotion, came out from the room for the first time since arriving and joined you all. You spent the evening chatting and playing a few games, enjoying the last evening of the trip together. Bedtime arrived, within the blink of an eye. As the group hunkered down for the night, your mom did a final round to be sure nothing had been left behind. She explained that Cliff was going to start driving early in the morning, like on the first day, but would be letting everyone else in the group sleep. There wouldn't be a need for all of them to get up. Now was the time to check you hadn't left anything outside. You, as well as everyone else, were confident you had it all packed up inside the RV, which meant it was time to get some rest before the journey home tomorrow. Your moms and Elizabeth said goodnight, heading to the back room, while you climbed up to the loft. Cove and his family got situated below in the previously set arrangement. You tried to get comfortable as a million thoughts were running through your mind. It was hard to believe the trip was practically over, and before you knew it, you'd be back in your own bed at home. You enjoyed this mini-adventure. You thought the trip had been okay. You felt the trip was a waste of time. You hadn't had a good time. I enjoyed this mini-adventure. It was short, that was for sure, but you got to see and do so much during your time here. All in all, it was a nice break away from home. The minutes ticked by silently. It didn't take long for the soft snores of Cliff and Kyra to drift up to you. They were asleep now. You wondered if Cove was still awake and decided to poke your head out from the loft to find out. You blinked through the dark. Looking down the hall, you noticed Cove lying on his back, his eyes staring straight up at the ceiling. His seafoam hair was spread out on his sleeping bag. He must have felt you watching him because suddenly his eyes looked on yours. It was difficult to see much in the dim light, but you could make out the crooked smile on his face well enough. You grinned back at him. You made a silly face. You waved at him. I would grin back at him if I liked him. Cove shrugged in his bed while still smiling, or at least you thought he did. You then gestured for him to come over. You went back to trying to sleep. You then decided to have fun quietly. I then gestured for him to come over. Cove looked unsure about it, but you were happy to see him slowly start to sit up anyway. His sleeping bag rustled as he moved, though he tried to go slow and froze up like a deer in headlights every time he made a sound, watching his parents for any sign of movement. Eventually, he managed to maneuver around his sleeping dad and make it to the ladder, standing on the bottom rung where he looked up at you and whispered, "What?" "Hi. Oh, it was nothing. Good night. How are you doing?" You invited him up to the loft. "Do you want to come up?" His eyes widened, just so. You could only tell because he had come to where you were. Cove glanced behind him quickly at his sleeping parents before turning back to you.